The blood on the sand had already turned dark beneath the Nevada sun, and the tiny Mustang foal's breathing came in shallow, desperate gasps. Beneath the shadow of towering red cliffs, where million-dollar ranches sprawled across the horizon, a scene of cruelty had just unfolded that would haunt one man's conscience forever. Kestrel Vandermeer adjusted his Italian leather gloves and stepped away from the wounded animal, his custom-made boots crunching on the desert gravel. The oil magnate's weathered face showed no emotion as he surveyed the carnage. His prized stallion Wildfire had trampled the newborn foal during a territorial dispute, leaving the tiny creature with what appeared to be a shattered leg and internal injuries. "Load Wildfire into the trailer," Kestrel commanded his ranch hands, his voice carrying the authority of a man worth $300 million. "We're done here." His foreman, a grizzled cowboy named Rusty, hesitated. "Sir, what about the foal? We could leave it." Kestrel cut him off sharply. "Nature will take its course. I won't waste veterinary bills on a half-dead animal that'll never amount to anything." The ranch hands exchanged uncomfortable glances, but followed orders. They'd learned long ago that Kestrel Vandermeer's word was law on his 50,000-acre empire. Money bought silence, just as it bought everything else in his world. As the convoy of luxury trucks disappeared into the distance, leaving only dust clouds and tire tracks, the foal struggled to lift his head. His coat, a stunning mixture of copper and gold that seemed to catch fire in the sunlight, was matted with blood and dirt. One leg bent at an unnatural angle, and each breath sent waves of agony through his small body. The desert stretched endlessly, in all directions, a harsh landscape where only the strongest survived. Buzzards already circled overhead, their patient shadows growing longer as the day wore on. Miles away, in a ramshackle trailer that had seen better decades, Brantley Hawthorne wiped grease from his hands with a torn rag. The auto mechanic had spent another 14-hour day trying to coax life from dying engines, his calloused fingers working magic on machines that others had given up on. His bank account held exactly $47, but his heart held something far more valuable, an unwavering belief that every living thing deserved a chance. The radio crackled with local chatter as Brantley cleaned his tools. Through the static, he caught fragments of conversation about expensive horses and desert ranches, but he paid little attention. His world existed in the margins, where broken things found their way to his doorstep. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and crimson, a dust devil spun across the vast emptiness. In its wake, the injured foal made one final attempt to stand, his legs buckling beneath him as consciousness faded. The first stars were appearing when fate intervened in the form of a wrong turn. Brantley, returning from a late service call, had taken an unfamiliar road to avoid construction traffic. His battered pickup truck, held together by prayers and spare parts, coughed and wheezed through the desert night. That's when his headlights caught something that would change everything, a small, still form lying beside the road, barely visible, against the dark sand. Brantley's truck shuddered to a halt, the engine ticking as it cooled in the desert night. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment, its beam cutting through the darkness to illuminate what he'd initially mistaken for a pile of rags. His breath caught in his throat. The foal was alive, but barely. Shallow breaths lifted and lowered the tiny ribcage, and when Brantley knelt beside the animal, he could see the devastating extent of the injuries. The left front leg was clearly broken, twisted at an angle that made his stomach lurch. Dark stains in the sand told. The story of internal bleeding and the foal's eyes, when they fluttered open, were glazed with pain and shock. "Easy there, little one," Brantley whispered, his voice gentle despite the urgency of the situation. He'd grown up on a small ranch before his family lost everything to drought and debt. He knew horses, and he knew this foal was dying. Most people would have seen a lost cause. Brantley saw a fighter, Working with practiced efficiency, he retrieved a tarp from his truck bed and carefully maneuvered the injured animal onto it. The foal weighed perhaps 60 pounds, but dead weight was always heavier. Sweat beaded on Brantley's forehead as he lifted the makeshift stretcher into his truck, his 40-year-old back protesting every movement. The nearest veterinary clinic was 40 miles away in Reno, but as Brantley's truck limped through the night, he knew they'd never make it. Dr. Marlowe Fitzgerald closed her practice at 6 sharp, and it was nearly 11. The emergency animal hospital would cost thousands, money Brantley simply didn't have, but he knew someone who might help. Callie Morrison had been the town's unofficial animal healer for 3 decades. A former veterinary technician who'd never quite finished her degree, she'd devoted her life to caring for creatures that others had written off. Her small ranch on the outskirts of town was part sanctuary, part miracle factory. The porch light was still on when Brantley's truck wheezed into her driveway. Callie emerged before he could even honk the horn, her silver hair catching the light as she hurried toward them. She wore scrubs despite the late hour, as if she'd been expecting them. "Found him in the desert," Brantley said without preamble, as they carefully transferred the foal to Callie's makeshift examination table in her barn. "Someone left him to die." Callie's jaw tightened as she began her assessment. Her hands, weathered, but surprisingly gentle, probed the foal's injuries with professional competence. "Broken leg, possible internal bleeding, severe dehydration. This little guy's been through hell. Can you save him?" She met Brantley's eyes across the examination table. "It'll take everything I've got, and even then," she shook her head. "The surgery alone will cost more than both our monthly incomes combined. And that's assuming he survives the night." Brantley didn't hesitate. "Do it. Whatever it costs, I'll find a way to pay." "Brantley, I can't afford not to try." His voice carried a conviction that surprised them both. This little guy fought to stay alive until someone found him. "The least I can do is fight for him now." Callie studied the mechanic's face in the harsh barn light. She'd known Brantley for 15 years, had watched him struggle to keep his business afloat while never turning away a customer who couldn't pay. If he said he'd find the money, somehow he would. "All right," she said finally, "but I'll need to operate tonight. His condition's too critical to wait." As Callie prepared her instruments, Brantley found himself staring at the injured foal. Despite everything the animal had endured, there was something in those dark eyes that spoke of an unbreakable spirit. The same spirit that had kept Brantley going through his own struggles, the foreclosure notices, the empty refrigerator, the nights when he'd chosen between heating and electricity. "What do you think happened to him?" Callie asked as she sterilized her surgical tools. Brantley's expression hardened. "Someone with more money than heart decided he wasn't worth saving." The surgery lasted until dawn. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of Callie's converted barn, she worked with the precision of a master craftsman, her years of experience guiding hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion and emotion. Brantley assisted, following her quiet instructions as they fought to save a life that had already been written off by the world. The foal's heartbeat had flatlined twice during the night, only to surge back to life with a stubbornness that amazed them both. Callie had seen thousands of animals pass through her doors, but she'd never encountered such a fierce will to survive in something so small and broken. "Internal bleeding stopped," she announced, as the first rays of sunlight crept through the barn windows. "The leg's going to need pins, but I think we've stabilized him." Brantley, who'd been holding his breath for what felt like hours, finally allowed himself to exhale. The foal's breathing was stronger now, more regular, though he remained unconscious from the anesthesia. "Now comes the hard part," Callie warned, pulling off her surgical gloves. "Recovery. Even if everything goes perfectly, he'll need months of care. Physical therapy, medication, specialized feed, and there's no guarantee he'll ever walk normally again. But he'll live? If we can keep him fighting, yes. He'll live. Over the following weeks, Brantley's life became a careful balance between earning money and saving it. He took on every job that came his way, working 18-hour days to cover the mounting veterinary bills. His breakfast became black coffee and whatever crackers he could find in his kitchen cupboards. His evenings were spent at Callie's ranch, helping with the foal's care. They named him Phoenix for the way he'd risen from what should have been his funeral pyre in the desert. The name seemed to inspire the young horse, who showed remarkable progress despite his traumatic start. Within 2 weeks, he was standing on wobbly legs, his broken limb supported by a custom brace that Brantley had fashioned from materials at his shop. But their newfound hope was shattered when Kestrel Vandermeer's attorney arrived at Callie's ranch on a Tuesday morning, armed with papers and an attitude that could freeze hellfire. "My client is prepared to offer compensation for the return of his property," the lawyer announced, adjusting his expensive suit as he surveyed the humble surroundings with obvious disdain. "The animal in question is a registered Mustang with valuable bloodlines." Callie crossed her arms. "Your client abandoned this foal to die in the desert. He has no claim here." "I'm afraid you're mistaken. Mr. Vandermeer's stallion sired this animal. According to Nevada state law, that makes it his property, regardless of the circumstances surrounding its displacement." Brantley arrived during the heated exchange, his work clothes still dirty from a morning spent replacing an engine. He listened in growing anger as the attorney outlined Kestrel's legal position. "He left Phoenix to die," Brantley said, his voice deadly quiet. "We saved his life. We've invested thousands of dollars and months of care, which my client appreciates. That's why he's offering compensation." The lawyer slid a check across Callie's kitchen table. $5,000 should more than cover your expenses." Neither Brantley nor Callie moved to pick up the check. "This isn't about money," Callie said. "It's about doing what's right. What's right is following the law. Mr. Vandermeer expects his property returned within 48 hours, or he'll be forced to involve the sheriff." After the lawyer left, Brantley and Callie sat in stunned silence. Outside, Phoenix grazed, peacefully in the small paddock, his leg brace glinting in the afternoon sun. He'd put on weight, his coat had regained its lustrous sheen, and he'd begun to trust humans again. The thought of returning him to the man who'd abandoned him felt like a betrayal of everything they'd fought for. "There has to be something we can do," Brantley said finally. Callie shook her head. "He's got the law on his side. Money always does." Brantley spent that night staring at the ceiling of his trailer, his mind racing through possibilities. By morning, he'd made a decision that would either save Phoenix or destroy what little stability he'd managed to build in his life. He called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years and drove to the county courthouse in Reno. The records. Clerk, a tired-looking woman named Deanna, who'd grown up in the same neighborhood as Brantley, helped him navigate the labyrinth of legal documents and property records. "What exactly are you looking for?" she asked as they dug through boxes of files in the basement archives. "Proof that Kestrel Vandermeer doesn't own every piece of dirt in Nevada," Brantley replied, his eyes scanning deed after deed. It took 6 hours of searching, but they found it. Buried in a stack of territorial surveys from the 1800s was a document that changed everything. The land where Phoenix had been found, a narrow strip along the old mining road, had never been officially incorporated into any private ranch. It remained public land, managed by the Bureau of Land Management. "This is it," Brantley breathed, holding the yellowed paper with trembling hands. He was on public land. That makes him a wild Mustang under federal protection. Deanna squinted at the survey markers. "Are you sure this is the right location?" "Dead sure. I've driven that road 1,000 times." Armed with his discovery, Brantley drove straight to the office of the local wildlife advocate, a formidable woman named Quintessa Crane, who'd spent 30 years fighting for animal rights. Her small office above the bakery was cluttered with files, photographs of rescued animals, and framed letters from grateful families whose pets she'd helped save. Federal protection trumps state property law, Quintessa confirmed after reviewing Brantley's documents. If Phoenix was found on BLM land, he's technically a wild Mustang. But proving it in court will be expensive, and Vandermeer's got resources. You don't. I don't care about the cost. Quintessa studied the determined mechanic sitting across from her desk. This could bankrupt you. Even if we win, legal fees alone will run into the tens of thousands. Then I'll go bankrupt. Brantley's voice carried a conviction that surprised them both. That Foal fought for his life when everyone else gave up on him. I won't abandon him now. Within hours, Quintessa had filed an emergency injunction preventing Phoenix's removal pending a federal hearing. Kestrel Vandermeer's response was swift and brutal. He hired the most expensive legal team in Nevada and began a campaign of intimidation designed to crush any opposition. First came the building inspectors, who suddenly found code violations in Brantley's shop that had been overlooked for years. Then the health department arrived at Callie's ranch, citing concerns about sanitation in her animal care facility. Finally, Brantley's business insurance was mysteriously canceled, leaving him unable to operate legally. He's trying to destroy us, Callie said during one of their evening strategy sessions. Phoenix grazed nearby, his leg almost fully healed, unaware of the legal battle raging around him. Let him try, Brantley replied. Some things are worth fighting for, even if you lose everything else. The story of the abandoned foal and the mechanic willing to risk everything to save him began to spread through the small town. The local newspaper picked it up first, then regional television stations. Soon, donations began trickling in from strangers who'd been moved by Phoenix's story of survival and Brantley's determination to protect him. But Kestrel Vandermeer had one more weapon in his arsenal, one that would test the limits of Brantley's resolve and force him to make the hardest decision of his life. The fire started at 3 a.m. on a windless Tuesday. Brantley was awakened by pounding on his trailer door and the acrid smell of smoke. His neighbor, old Cornelius Webb, stood on the steps in his pajamas, pointing toward the glow rising from the direction of town. Your shop's burning, son. Fire department's already on scene. By the time Brantley arrived, his life's work was reduced to a smoldering shell. The garage where he'd spent 15 years building his reputation lay in ruins, twisted metal and melted plastic marking where his tools and equipment had been. The official cause would later be listed as an electrical fire, but Brantley knew better. The timing was too convenient, the destruction too complete. Fire Chief Dwight Morrison, no relation to Callie despite the shared name, pulled Brantley aside as the firefighters finished their work. I'm sorry, Brantley. Nothing left to save. You have insurance? It was canceled last week. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Standing in the pre-dawn darkness, watching smoke rise from the remains of everything he'd built, Brantley felt the full weight of his decision to fight for Phoenix. Kestrel Vandermeer's message was clear. Surrender the foal or lose everything. The next morning brought another blow. Quintessa called with news that Vandermeer's legal team had filed a motion questioning the authenticity of the territorial survey documents. They were demanding a costly independent verification of the boundary markers, a process that could take months and cost more than Brantley would earn in 5 years. He's playing for time, Quintessa explained. Trying to bleed us dry before we can get to trial. How much time do we have? The injunction expires in 30 days. If we can't prove our case by then... She didn't need to finish. Phoenix would be returned to the man who'd left him to die. But the story of the burned garage and the mechanic's unwavering dedication to a rescued horse had touched something deep in the community. That afternoon, contractors began arriving at the site without being asked. Electricians, plumbers, and carpenters who'd known Brantley for years started clearing debris and planning reconstruction. "You fixed my truck when I couldn't pay," said Harold Moss, a retired contractor who'd organized the volunteer effort. "Time to return the favor." Even more surprising was the arrival of Dr. Marlowe Fitzgerald, the veterinarian whose expensive clinic Brantley had never been able to afford. She pulled into Calais' driveway in her pristine SUV, medical bag in hand. "I've been following Phoenix's story in the papers," she told a surprised Callie. "I'd like to offer my services pro bono for his continued care." But the most unexpected support came from an unlikely source. Temperance Ashford, Kestrel Vandermeer's own daughter, arrived at the ranch on a Thursday evening driving a modest sedan instead of the luxury vehicles typically associated with her family. She was nothing like her father, where Kestrel was hard and calculating. Temperance possessed a gentle strength that immediately put Phoenix at ease. The young horse, now walking without his brace, approached her with the curiosity he'd learned to show toward kind humans. "I heard about what my father did," she said, her voice heavy with shame. "Leaving this beautiful animal to die, it's unforgivable." Temperance revealed something that could change everything. She'd been present the day Phoenix was injured and had witnessed her father's callous decision to abandon the foal. More importantly, she had photographs on her phone that proved the exact location where Phoenix had been found, well within the boundaries of public land. "Why are you helping us?" Brantley asked, suspicious of any Vandermeer bearing gifts. "Because what my father did was wrong, because this horse deserves better, and because I've spent my whole life watching money corrupt everything it touches." She looked directly at Brantley. "You're the first person I've met who's willing to lose everything for something that can't pay you back. That's courage I've never seen before." With Temperance's evidence and testimony, the case took a dramatic turn. The federal hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, and for the first time since the legal battle began, victory seemed possible. But Kestrel Vandermeer had one final devastating card to play. The call came on Sunday night. Quintessa's voice was tense as she delivered the news that would shatter everything they'd worked for. Vandermeer's team found something. Phoenix isn't just any Mustang foal. He's the offspring of a mare that was part of a federal breeding program. That makes him government property, not wild stock under BLM protection. "What does that mean?" Brantley asked, though he already dreaded the answer. "It means we lose. Federal breeding stock trumps everything, even Vandermeer's ownership claims. Phoenix will be returned to the breeding facility in Colorado." Brantley hung up the phone and walked out to the paddock where Phoenix grazed under the stars. The young horse had grown strong over the months of recovery, his copper coat gleaming with health, his movement fluid despite the slight limp that would always remind them of his traumatic beginning. He'd learned to trust again, to find joy in simple pleasures like fresh grass and gentle hands. Now he would spend his life as a breeding animal, valued only for his genetic contribution to government herds. "I'm sorry, boy," Brantley whispered, reaching through the fence to stroke Phoenix's neck. "I tried." But fate had one more twist in store. Temperance Vandermeer had spent her sleepless night conducting research of her own. Her privileged education and connections in the horse breeding world led her to a discovery that would vindicate everything Brantley had sacrificed. She arrived at the ranch Monday morning with documents that told the real story. Phoenix's mother hadn't escaped from a government breeding facility. She'd been sold at auction to a private collector who'd failed to update the registration records. By law, any offspring born after the sale belonged to the current owner, not the government. But there was more. The private collector who'd purchased Phoenix's mother was Kestrel Vandermeer himself, buying horses for his ranch through a series of shell companies to hide the true scope of his operations. "My father created this whole mess," Temperance explained to the gathered crowd at the federal hearing. "He bought Phoenix's mother legally, but never registered the transaction properly. Then he abandoned Phoenix when the foal was injured, claiming he wasn't responsible. He can't have it both ways." The federal magistrate, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Cordelia Vance, listened to 3 days of testimony before rendering her decision. Kestrel Vandermeer sat in the front row, his expensive legal team flanking him like armored guards, confidence radiating from every pore. His confidence evaporated when Judge Vance began speaking. "This case represents everything wrong with how we treat animals in this country," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years on the bench. "Mr. Vandermeer, your actions were not only morally reprehensible but legally indefensible. You cannot abandon an animal to die and then claim ownership when that animal proves valuable." The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. Phoenix was declared the legal property of Brantley Hawthorne, who'd invested his own resources in the animal's care and recovery. Furthermore, Kestrel Vandermeer was ordered to pay restitution for the costs incurred in Phoenix's treatment, plus damages for the harassment campaign that had destroyed Brantley's business. But the most satisfying moment came when Judge Vance addressed the oil magnate directly. "Mr. Vandermeer, you have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes, but you lack the basic human decency that Mr. Hawthorne demonstrated when he stopped to help a dying animal. Wealth without compassion is poverty of the worst kind." Months later, Brantley's rebuilt garage was bustling with activity. The insurance settlement and restitution payment had allowed him to upgrade his equipment and expand his operation. His story had made him something of a local celebrity, bringing customers from across the state who wanted their vehicles serviced by the man who'd fought a millionaire for a horse. Phoenix had grown into a magnificent young stallion, his slight limp barely noticeable as he galloped through the 20-acre pasture that Brantley had purchased with part of his settlement. The horse that had once been left to die in the desert now served as a therapy animal for troubled children, his gentle nature and inspiring story offering hope to those who needed it most. Temperance Vandermeer had used her inheritance to establish an animal rescue foundation, working closely with Callie to expand the makeshift sanctuary into a state-of-the-art facility. Her father, bankrupted by legal fees and damaged by the scandal, had been forced to sell his ranch. He'd moved to a modest apartment in Reno, where he worked as a consultant for failing oil companies. On quiet evenings, Brantley would stand at Phoenix's fence and remember that night in the desert when he'd made the decision to stop for a dying animal. He'd nearly lost everything, but in fighting for Phoenix's life, he'd discovered something more valuable than money: the knowledge that some battles are worth fighting, regardless of the cost. Phoenix would nicker softly and approach the fence, pressing his great head against Brantley's chest in a gesture of trust and gratitude that spoke louder than words. They'd saved each other, the broken-down mechanic and the abandoned foal, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come from refusing to give up on something the world has written off as worthless. In the distance, the desert stretched endlessly, under starlit skies, no longer a place of death and abandonment, but a testament to the power of compassion to transform even the most hopeless situations into something beautiful.